Hello, my name's Michael Cups, and I'm with ActiveOps. You're listening to another episode of AOTV. Really excited to be joined today by Marc Romain, who's a longtime senior leader in the banking industry, and we'll get to his introduction in just a minute. Just a reminder, ActiveOps is a decision intelligence platform for the service operations and allowing your team to do more. So, Marc, welcome to the broadcast. It's good to see you again. Thanks for joining.
Well, thank you, Michael. Really good to be joining you today. So a little bit about me. My background is sort of 34 years in financial services, either as a ops leader or more in a sort of senior ops leadership role, primarily within the sort of capital markets businesses across corporate and investment banking, experience across credit risk and wholesale lending businesses as well. Plus a little bit of time within retail banking and a data management type business. And in the data management business, it was really more about trying to build out a KYC utility and how to do that for the corporate and investment banking businesses.
Yeah, excellent. Well, 34 years, you must have seen a bit of change in operations through those years. Not calling you old or anything, but just you probably saw a lot of change.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Certainly seen the gyrations, very much in this industry, whether it be cost challenge periods which sort of ebb and flow through those 34 years, or, occasionally having the opportunity to try and scale a business end to end and clearly using data, which we'll get onto, and being pretty critical to trying to do that.
Yeah. Well, great. And I look forward to hearing that and talking about the tech aspects, but just listening to those roles that you conducted through the years, you were in operations. You had lots of humans, lots of people doing work, associates doing work. You had a lot of work coming in. The inventory probably came in volumes, and sometimes less and sometimes higher, and then you had kind of a lot to process and match that work and people. I mean, can you tell us a little bit more about the challenges that leaders in that kind of role have on a daily, weekly basis, or even long-term, thinking months or even years?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Michael. And, for me, there are actually numerous challenges. When you think about the type of operations, we're talking about, and sort of the operations I sort of covered, across various big banks, around capital markets, credit risk, or the wholesale lending businesses. For me, I probably, outlined them about 6 key challenges that I can think of. One is really, how do you effectively resource various teams, and how are you allocating work and monitoring that? So in other words, most teams will always have some form of SLA that could be daily, weekly, monthly, that teams are having to deliver against. And, the complexity has only got greater in teams like that, where you've got hybrid working, you've got multi-locational splits of teams, whereas historically they might have all been in your own location. And I just think that's got even more demanding for big scale operations and how you manage through that. I think another area that I think is particularly challenging, and I think leaders need to think about, and when you're running those sort of teams, is the risk and control management and mindset. And what I mean by that is really understanding the end-to-end controls and risk of a process that a particular team is running or managing. And that could also mean some of it is done locally, some of it could be done, remotely in another team. So it's making sure that end-to-end understanding is there and is being really understood and managed on a day-to-day basis well. Third area I can think of is, the client journey. What is that end-to-end client experience? What does the customer really feel? They aren't interested in, an operation saying, well, I hand off to another team. That's not, of interest to the client. It's just that end-to-end experience is really important, I think, in, the way operations are being run and the challenges people will face today. Fourthly, I sort of touched a little bit in our intro. I think, the industry definitely goes through cycles of, challenge around cost and focus. And I think in any operational role, the ability to manage your cost effectively and well is really important, and I think is going to get even more important in the sort of accelerated changes that are really happening in operations. And what does operations look like in the future when you think about AI, machine learning, robotics, which I think we'll touch on a little bit more later. The fifth area, to me, is that future of operations that I just touched on, and how does that evolve, and the continued challenge and the acceleration of automation and digitization within operations. And then finally, but not least, I think there is a greater expectation when you take everything I've sort of talked through, is really about operational resiliency. I think there's going to be a greater expectation from regulators, clients, businesses around, as operations continues to change radically and at an accelerated pace, what is your operational resiliency? And is there a good understanding of that in big, large scale operations?
Yeah, very good. Six great challenges and points that are impacting operations. Let's start with the big elephant in the room. That there's about to be just a seismic, if it's not happening already, a seismic change in operations based on AI. AI is everywhere. You can't scan a news website without seeing probably the multitude of articles on it. There's obviously there's a bit in there about data, and I want to ask that in a subsequent question. But before we get to that data question, what else do operation leaders need to think about as they look at this potential, game-changing technology that's impacting everything in different ways, from chatbots to, how they create content and so forth. What else do they need to be thinking about when they think about change? Is it identifying risk takers? Is it partnerships with other, similar operations inside the company or outside the company? Or what else should people be considering as they think about these kind of monumental shifts?
Yeah, and again, Michael, I agree. I think, to me, having been in operations a pretty long time, I think I probably started a journey where I think all the teams I used to manage were probably very much in location, invisible sight of where I was working, to an environment now where, with the pandemic, we definitely have a hybrid world, which is clearly still evolving to the more optimal end state. But you've got people working from home, you've got people working in offices, you've got teams working remotely. So you've got a completely different operational setup. And then you bring in the topics you threw out around increased automation, be it through robotics, machine learning, and where AI is going. And I think the key elements that I think leaders are going to really need to think about is, well, what is that skill set you need to invest in? If you think about what we've just talked about, the skills of what operations used to traditionally experience and want, I still think, you need some of those today. But if you think about where AI is going to take operations, machine learning, as we also touched on, and robotics, I think there's got to be a much more increased focus around your analytical and data skills of teams. Really driving into individuals who have the ability and the desire, investing in that kind of skill and capability, I think very critical. We touched on the earlier topic or question you asked me. I think there's going to be a need to have an even better understanding of that end-to-end customer journey. So what is the client you're working with? What is that journey end to end? It's not just about the piece of the process you perform. It's really understanding it end to end. And with that understanding of end to end, where am I reliant on some form of AI or machine learning to fulfill some of that process, versus where do I, as an individual in a team, need to then work on a piece of that outcome to deliver the end outcome to a customer? And I think included in that is also my earlier point around risk and control. I think particularly in operations, quite often, operations is that final safety net around the risk and control and what, is the end outcome. So, increasing that risk and control understanding and mindset with all the changes we've talked about hitting operations, I think is also very important. And then finally, you talked about, do we need to be bigger risk takers or partners? I think it's more not necessarily bigger risk takers, because I think the nature of operations is, a very important role is that risk and control mindset of what you perform in your role, and make sure that outcome, is correct, well controlled, well managed. I think it's more the one of partnership, and looking at where can you affect, effective partners that can help you with that journey of transforming operations, be it, we're talking about, and we'll get onto data and active ops. But I think it's being able to partner with the right partners in order to drive that end-to-end transformation of operations and where you want that to land in the future.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. And so let's talk about that transformation and the need for data. Can you share your experiences using data and the challenges of getting the right data at the right time? And what is it? How do you why do operations find that so difficult sometimes to get that data to the managers making decisions or directors making decisions? What's the challenges there, and what is that data that they need?
Look, I mean, in my experience, I've run, teams from be it transactional reporting through reporting of client money segregation, excuse me, through, backlog reduction, be it in Nostros or reference data or brokerage. And, plus also run a sort of Six Sigma team around a portfolio of projects where you're trying to use Six Sigma lean type technology or technique, along with data to really drive end-to-end improvements, be it in a process that ultimately is about trying to scale a business, or it could be about how to make a particular process or team more efficient, be it in productivity or being able to scale and do cost avoidance. And with that sort of experience, I think, the challenge has been, I think, for me, and still is, typically operations is never about being data poor, but it's more about being insight poor, i.e. you have the data, but it's never in a integrated way. It could be on Excel spreadsheets, but very, very often it's not in an integrated way where you could look at it end to end and have good visualization. I think some of the reason for that, typically the type of operations I've run and, the sort of scale is invariably you've got legacy mainframe systems. And it's not that you just have one system. Quite often you have a number of systems.
Right.
Two, they don't necessarily all talk to each other in a very integrated, streamlined way. Three, data will be available to you, be it overnight, intraday, or in batch. So with all of that, when you're trying to pull data into an insightful way, it's very manually intensive, and it's not necessarily time sensitive at times. So that just adds to the complication. If you're wanting to use data in an insightful way, I think it's quite a fragmented environment, although clearly a lot of operations, be it in banking, insurance, etc., are starting to invest more money in strategic systems and invariably have that sort of transformational journey. So embedding the right sort of data, capturing it more real time on a more regular basis, I think will allow, to have better data insight and be able to, get the right tools as, one tries to transform an operation going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I think the one phrase in there that caught my attention the most is they have the data, they just don't have the insights, or it's not integrated. So they may have it in multiple forms. So let's talk about active ops just a bit. We don't want to make this about us necessarily. I want to hear more from you. But I think you attended Capacity 23 in London, and we're excited that you joined us. And what do you think about the decision intelligence platform and where the direction we're taking the technology, combined with AI and what we've historically done to help operations?
Yeah, and yes, Michael, as you said, I did join, which I was found it very interesting. Joining the conference in London. I think, a lot of what we've talked about, definitely came up from other leaders, in be it in banking, insurance, or fund accounting, asset management. And I think, one thing that struck me, particularly not having been to a conference for probably a couple of years, is just how the roadmap has evolved, right? Some of the work, I think, around artificial intelligence and how that can help create more predictive sort of planning for teams, and allow people to then, reassess or change some of that predictive capability. But I think that's a massive sort of step forward, along with sort of the skills analysis capability and linking that into the product offering. And I think, the offering where you can also talk about case management work versus transactional. And let me elaborate a bit more on that. I mean, typically, I suppose the way I've always looked at operations is I think there are two types of operations that I think you typically have within the banking world. One which is more transactional. And what I mean by that, typically you could probably work out what's the work coming in and have what I call a standard unit time of, what it will take to do X amount of those widgets. And by definition, then work out potentially you need Y people to support that type of flow. The other type of operation, which I think is more like a KYC operation I've worked in, or a wholesale lending operation, is more what I would call case management, whereby, typically that isn't, you start a piece of work and you finish it. Invariably, it means you start a case. You then might have a request out to a business partner, or you might have a request out to get something from a client, or you might have a request out to legal for an opinion, or a request out to credit. So as you go through that journey on that piece of work, it is more what I call start, stop, continue, hence more case management. So I think how Active Ops and in capacity, 23 in London, hearing different teams and leaders going through those sort of challenges and how the product has evolved and the sort of R&D, I think Active Ops is doing, certainly taking the product on the right journey. I think a lot of work also around what I would call the operational leadership dashboard. We talked about the earlier challenge that I spoke about in terms of a lot of data in operations, but quite insight poor. I think being able to pull that data into a more helicopter view of how your operation has been run for a senior leader is a lot more powerful, and how that's going forward. And I suppose, just to end with a couple of experiences, I suppose, for me, in my various roles, excuse me, where I've used Active Ops is, one, in probably a very similar period to where I think there's a big operational cost challenge in the industry that I've worked in for the years we talked about. It absolutely allowed me the data which showed me where there was productivity, latency, opportunity within my teams, and to be able to reliably work through where I could reduce cost but still maintain delivery against an SLA or an outcome. And then more recently, in one of my roles, through the pandemic, when there was a regulatory-driven requirement for 2 new products to be offered by accredited lenders within the UK market, the data and insight using Active Ops allowed me to pull together a very credible business case, which said in order to support these 2 new offerings to support customers, I would need to drive and build out a team of 100 people at scale and quickly. And also due to the fact that other teams were using the tool, it also allowed to identify where there were some common skill or capability, which would allow us to mobilize a team relatively quickly and train them up in order to build that team of scale. to deliver the outcome of 2 new products that were launched and needed to be made available to customers very quickly and very rapidly. Yeah. And at what point in the future could that team then scale down and resources that had been leveraged be reallocated back to the teams that they'd come from?
Yeah, very good, very good. Interesting lessons and observations from the real world of that. So let's take the decision intelligence concept a little bit further. While every operation is different, what do you think that, getting this? And I'm not going to use the word data. I'm going to use insights because I like the way you phrase that. Getting these insights to the managers, the frontline supervisors, the directors, and the leadership in real time, and how do you think that's going to impact an operation at scale when they actually have that consolidated information that you were talking about before that may have been disparate, and able to make decisions faster, maybe better? What are your thoughts on the impact of a large operation with that kind of data or insights?
I think if you get to a point where you've got that sort of integrated, sort of visual of your data, I think there are a couple of things that immediately spring to mind for me, and we've sort of touched on it in some of the earlier sort of conversation we've been having today. One is that more effective planning, monitoring, and control of what's the demand drivers coming into your operation, and how do you then allocate individuals across your teams, and you would have better visibility around where you might have peaks and troughs. So what I mean by that is immediate ability to better plan and manage what's coming into a team. But if you then have a trough and another one of your teams has a peak, with the skill understanding, are you then able to effectively load balance and be more agile and have transferability or fungibility within teams? Be it locally or remotely.
Yeah.
And, I think, you then, you have that much improved insight. And then I think the third one, I've talked a little bit out, and there's a common theme here. I think also with that integrated insight, I think you have a much better understanding of your end-to-end journey. And if you've got some of the additional data captured, you could maybe look at the cost to serve type equation of a particular journey. Or if you think about the case management side of integration of data, it's, where cases are looping. Yeah. What are the outliers? Why are some going through quicker than others? So just a completely different insight, which allows you to then either course correct how you're using people, or an opportunity to say, how do I build out more fungibility? And I use the insight I've got to be able to, I'm going to be a bit basic, plug and play, where I can transfer people, from one team to another. But, the one caution I would have with that is obviously if it's on different systems, you do need to think about toxic combinations, right? i.e., by creating individuals with different profiles, making sure you still are able to manage and control as you move people across, that you're not actually causing toxic combinations that then could cause you a risk and control challenge down the line.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Interesting view of it. I just got 2 more questions for you, Marc, and then we'll kind of meet our SLA of recording under 30 minutes. So the first one I have for you is, thinking about senior leader roles that you've had and senior leaders sitting in as we embark on a new year in 2024, they're thinking about all this change that could occur. Whether it's bringing in AI, bringing in automation, bringing in other things. What would you say is the cost of doing nothing or being a late adopter? I mean, banking is competitive. Healthcare is competitive in the U.S. and there's it's at least in the U.S. and healthcare, we hear it a lot. We say, well, this is the way we've always done that. So what's the cost of just waiting or not being a front mover? I mean, do you have any observations on that?
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, I think the cost of doing nothing is not an option, right? And why do I say that? I think operations, as we've been talking, Michael, I think is radically changing. And I think the acceleration around operations, service operations that we've been talking about is just accelerating at a pace. Why? I think AI we've touched on. robotics, machine learning. I think all of that's coming to a fore. I think also clients are getting more demanding. So there's that end-to-end expectation of the customer, the business, the regulator around operational resiliency. So, the view of doing nothing and just sitting there going, it will all just evolve around us. I just don't think it's an option.
Yeah.
And I think, if that's the option you take, I think the reality is customers and clients will vote with their feet and move to another competitor potentially. And, and thirdly, and secondly, I think, competition will just take over.
Yeah.
So, I just don't see that as an option. I think in terms of the sort of secondary element you talked about of being a late adopter or a first adopter, I don't think you have to be a first adopter of all AI or all those tools. I think what you've got to be more thoughtful over is depending on the nature of your operation, where your firm is, positioned. I think what you've got to be doing is be thoughtful around, in some instances, allowing others maybe to be the lead isn't a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think most importantly is how do you partner and look at that ecosystem of change going on around operations and work out where do you partner, where do you build? But the reality is you still are needing to transform. And, operations as you know it 10 years ago versus operations as we go forward from here from 10 years, that future of operations in my mind is a much more integrated world of, probably replatforming, some form of legacy platform that one is using in the operation, a more effective linking of end to end, and how does that data or data lineage really work? A desire to have a much more integrated, insightful view of your operation in terms of demand in, work out, and how are you allocating your resources in order to say you transform your operation to the future in the way that is most relevant for you. So the do nothing option to me just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But being mindful of how you transition with the acceleration of AI, machine learning, robotics, and the different tools that are available to you, I think it's where you sit on that risk spectrum.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much for all of the insight and the answers that you gave. Very, very well done. It's a learning opportunity for me as well. So the last question I have for you is just, I know you have a big network of people and the banks that you've worked in as a whole network of people. If somebody wanted to carry on the conversation with you directly, how's the best way to find you?
I think probably the best way, because I'm obviously on LinkedIn, although, clearly I've come out of mainstream corporate life, still pretty active in sort of trying to help you guys a bit. Plus, if people want to follow up the thread and have some conversation and insight with me off the back of this, I think LinkedIn would be probably the best way to kind of connect with me and go from there.
Excellent. Well, it's great to see you again, Marc, and great to talk to you. Thank you so much for contributing today to AOTV. We really appreciate your insights and experience. Thank you so much. And for all of our listeners, thank you so much. Be sure to go see activeops.com. There you can find information on the decision intelligence platform, various use cases, various aspects about the technology, and of course, check out our blogs and our latest ops tracker, which was just released for Q4. Thank you very much, and see you next time.